Welcome back to Real Fear Files, the channel where real terror lurks behind every shadow. Today, we're uncovering 9 bone-chilling tales from the mountains and plains of Colorado, where breathtaking beauty hides secrets too dark to imagine. From the eerie streets of Denver to the isolated peaks of the Rockies and the forgotten corners of small mountain towns, these stories reveal the impossible becoming reality. Each account comes directly from those who lived through the unexplainable, brave enough to share the horrors most would never believe. To protect their identities, names and details have been changed, but the truth remains raw and untamed. If you're new to Real Fear Files, hit subscribe for daily true horror that will make your skin crawl and force you to question what's really out there. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because the next story could shatter everything you thought you knew about fear. Story 1.
Back in my college days, me and a couple of buddies used to hang out at Denver International Airport late at night. Sounds weird, right? But for us, it was the perfect spot to kill time. The place never sleeps, there's decent food open 24/7, and the whole vibe had this weird, electric energy that somehow made sleepless nights feel less lonely. My best friend at the time, Emma, and I would usually show up earlier than the others, just to wander the terminals, grab ridiculously overpriced coffee from the Starbucks by the main gate, and watch the endless parade of travelers. By then, I'd like to think Emma and I were street smart enough to notice sketchy situations. Growing up around Denver, we'd seen plenty of odd characters, so we thought we had a good handle on reading people. But no amount of experience could have prepped me for what happened that night. We rolled into the airport around 11 p.m., staking out our usual spot near baggage claim in the main terminal. The metal chairs there were stiff and unforgiving, classic airport seating, but we didn't care. We were laughing about some ridiculous campus drama when my eyes landed on a guy across the room, probably 20 feet away, near the carousel. He was staring right at us, not pretending to glance at luggage or anything else. The first thing I noticed about him was his look. He seemed late 40s, maybe early 50s, wearing a faded denim jacket in May. His eyes, man, they were hollow and sharp, and it immediately set off alarms in my gut. His skin had this grayish pallor, the kind you sometimes see on people who've been through serious substance issues. He kept shifting his weight back and forth in this slow, almost rhythmic way, and it was creeping me out. Emma noticed him too, and we exchanged a look that said it all. We'd seen a lot of people struggling downtown, usually kept our distance, but something about this dude felt different. He wasn't just existing in the space, he was watching us, with an intensity that made my skin crawl. After what felt like forever, probably only a couple of minutes, he started moving toward us. My gut screamed to get up and leave, but I froze for a second, not wanting to seem rude. Looking back, that was insane, prioritizing politeness over safety. But I was 20, and I thought being nice was just how life worked. He stopped a few feet from our chairs and asked if we'd seen any lost items turned in lately. His voice was rough, shaky, and he kept flexing his hands in this tense, jerky motion. I told him no, and suggested he check with the information desk upstairs. He nodded slowly, but didn't move. Then he started asking where we were from, if we went to school nearby, and how often we hung out at the airport. His questions felt invasive, but Emma, being friendly as ever, gave vague answers about us being local students who sometimes studied at the airport because it stayed open all night. My heart started racing. Every instinct screamed at me to shut it down, but I stayed quiet and let Emma handle it. Then came the line that made my stomach drop. He said he had a daughter our age and that we reminded him of her. Blonde hair like mine, nervous laugh like Emma's. Except we hadn't even laughed during this exchange. He was either remembering something that never happened or projecting something onto us that made no sense. I finally lied, saying our friends would be arriving soon and we had to meet them elsewhere. I hoped it would signal the end. He gave this wide, unsettling grin that didn't touch his eyes and said it was nice meeting such sweet girls, that Denver was lucky to have us. Then he drifted back toward the carousel, disappearing into the crowd. Emma and I sat frozen for a beat before I suggested moving to a more populated, better lit area near the train connecting terminals. Our other friends rolled in about half an hour later, and we filled them in. They brushed it off, calling it just another strange airport encounter. I tried convincing myself they were right. We grabbed some late-night burritos and left around 2 a.m., thinking the whole thing was over. But it wasn't. 3 days later, I got a notification on Instagram. The username was some random string of letters and numbers, but the profile picture? Unmistakable. It was him, the denim jacket guy, staring into the camera with those hollow eyes. He had liked 7 of my photos, all showing recognizable Denver spots: Red Rocks, Confluence Park, and parts of campus. At the time, my profile was public, which, looking back, was dumb. I quickly made it private and blocked him. The damage was done. He knew where I hung out, how I looked in different places. He had access to years of my digital life. Emma checked her account. He hadn't touched hers, which freaked me out even more. He had targeted me, the quieter one, the one who'd been less chatty that night. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing him, or someone who looked exactly like him, around town. Outside the tattered cover bookstore, at the light rail platform across from campus, always standing, always shifting weight in that same unsettling rhythm. I couldn't be sure it was him, but it felt too familiar. The breaking point came one Saturday at Union Station. Emma and I were chilling on the patio, talking about summer plans, when I saw him. No doubt about it. Across the street, leaning against the railing of the Millennium Bridge, staring straight at me. No hiding, just watching. He raised his hand in a slow wave. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Emma and told her we had to go, now. She saw him too, all color drained from her face. We went inside and called my older brother, who was always protective. He told me to stay put, he'd come over. About 20 minutes later, he showed up with his roommate, looking ready for a confrontation. We went back outside, but the guy was gone. My brother insisted I needed to report it to the police, which I did the next day. The officer seemed skeptical. No explicit threats, no physical contact. They couldn't do much. His advice? Keep social media private, change routines, and call if things escalated. Felt dismissive, but I followed it. I changed routes to campus, started driving instead of taking the light rail, and became hyper-aware of my surroundings. Emma and I stopped our late-night airport sessions, a small but painful loss of something that used to be fun. About a week later, I spotted a beat-up blue Chevy with Colorado plates and a peeling Denver Broncos bumper sticker in spots I frequented. The realization hit me. He might be tracking me. I decided I couldn't just sit around and wait for him to pop up again. The next time I saw him, it was at a King Soopers parking lot near campus. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I walked right up to him with my phone out, recording. My hands were shaking, but I forced my voice steady. "I know you've been following me," I said. "I already filed a police report. My uncle works with Denver PD and is keeping tabs on this." That last part? Totally made up. My uncle lives in Florida and works in insurance, but I said it like I meant it. And something in his face shifted. The hollow eyes, the crooked smile. They faltered. He looked caught, cornered, finally scared. He mumbled that I was mistaken, didn't know what I was talking about, then climbed into his truck and drove off. I never saw him again. I still don't know if my bluff scared him off, or if he just moved on to someone else.
someone who didn't recognize the signs. But it changed me forever. From that day on, I kept my guard up constantly. Every time I went to Denver International Airport, I scanned the crowd for faded denim jackets and empty eyes. I locked down my social media tighter than Fort Knox and thought twice before posting anything that hinted at my location. That man taught me a lesson I wish I hadn't needed to learn. Being kind can be mistaken for being weak. Politeness can look like an invitation. And some people, they'll see vulnerability and latch onto it like a predator. I hope he never found another target, but I know that's probably wishful thinking. After the parking lot incident, my world felt smaller. I started varying my routes to class, taking different buses, sometimes driving instead of riding the light rail. I paid extra attention to strangers in public, noticing details I never used to care about. Emma and I stopped our late-night airport hangouts completely. Something that had once been fun and innocent had been tainted by that guy's presence. Even everyday errands became tense. I noticed cars lingering longer than necessary. Someone standing too close at a bus stop. A figure watching from across the street. I didn't know if it was him or just paranoia, but I wasn't taking chances. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stay alert, to stay alive. Weeks passed. Months. Life started to feel normal again, but the shadow of that night never fully lifted. Even now, years later, I still feel a jolt when I hear the echo of heels or the shuffle of someone pacing nearby. I still imagine those hollow eyes in a crowd, scanning, waiting. The memory is vivid. The way he shifted his weight, the intensity of his stare, the way he made polite conversation feel like a trap. I learned to trust my gut above everything else. It's a lesson I carry every time I step out, whether it's campus, the grocery store, or the airport. That night taught me that safety isn't guaranteed, and that danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers through a smile or hides behind a denim jacket. Emma and I talk about it occasionally, though we don't dwell on it. It was one of those events that leaves a permanent scar, but also sharpens your senses. We laugh sometimes about how absurd it was that we thought we could just hang out in an empty airport at midnight without consequences. But the laughter is always nervous, tinged with the memory of that hollow stare. I also learned the power of action. Reporting him to the police, even if they seemed skeptical, and confronting him at the parking lot, those steps gave me back a sliver of control. Fear is paralyzing, but action, even bluffing, can shift the balance. That night, holding my phone, speaking firmly, I realized that even small moves can make a predator think twice. The incident left me hyper-aware of technology, too. I keep my accounts private now. I think twice before posting photos or locations. It's a constant reminder that in today's world, your digital life is visible to people you've never met, and sometimes, those people have dark intentions. Looking back, the whole ordeal feels surreal, like a horror movie I actually lived. And yet, the lessons remain real. Trust your instincts, don't let politeness override safety, and never underestimate someone who seems harmless at first glance. Kindness is a virtue, but vigilance is survival. Even though he disappeared from my life, the impact lingers. Airports aren't just terminals for travel anymore. They're reminders of that night, the unpredictability of strangers, and the fragile line between safety and danger. The memory of him waves through my mind like a phantom every time I walk past crowds, reminding me to stay alert, to stay alive. I hope that girl he imagined in me and Emma, the one he said we reminded him of, is safe somewhere. I hope he never found another target, but I know some predators never stop hunting. All I can do is remember, stay vigilant,
and trust that intuition that screamed at me that night. Some people see kindness as an invitation, and politeness can be dangerous. And so, I navigate life a little differently now. I smile, I laugh, I hang out with friends, but always with an eye over my shoulder. I learned that safety isn't something you can assume, it's something you actively protect. And while the memory of him still sends chills down my spine, it also reminds me of my own strength. That night at the airport, the hollow eyes in the denim jacket, the obsessive attention, the Instagram stalking, it all taught me something I carry with me every day. Fear can be paralyzing, but awareness, courage, and action can turn it into survival. And sometimes, being just a little bit suspicious could save your life. Story 2. I don't really remember much about my early childhood before I turned 13. There are blank spaces in my memory that my current therapist says probably come from trauma, the brain's way of shielding itself from stuff too painful to process at the time. What I do remember are little fragments, scattered pieces of a puzzle that didn't make sense until a few years ago, when the picture became terrifyingly clear. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, in a house with a view of the Flatirons. Those big, jagged rocks that tourists snap photos of and locals barely notice. My mom was a single parent, and our relationship was complicated in ways I couldn't have explained as a kid. There was love there, I guess, but there was also something controlling, something dark, that I wouldn't fully understand until years later. When I was 7, my mom started taking me to see a counselor. I can't remember what triggered it. Maybe something at school, or maybe just her noticing my behavior. But I remember the drives up into the mountains. We'd leave Boulder, twist through winding roads past Evergreen, and dive into dense forests where cabins were tucked among ponderosa pines and Douglas firs. The counselor's office was in one of those cabins, tiny, A-frame, with big windows looking out onto the woods. She was known to me only as Ms. Lila, a woman in her 40s with long gray hair she always braided down her back. Soft voice, calm energy, seemingly kind. I saw her every week for 7 years. 7 years of mountain drives, sitting in that cabin, breathing in the smell of pine and wood smoke, talking about things I barely remember. And yet, I never left feeling better. If anything, I always felt more lost, more anxious, more disconnected from myself. By 14, I was deep in depression. I'd started cutting my arms and thighs where my mom wouldn't see, feeling like I was drowning under this constant weight. Therapy didn't help. My relationship with my mom had gotten worse. She monitored everything, my friends, my music, my clothes, even my diary and phone. Nothing escaped her scrutiny. And when I tried to bring up my feelings of suffocation to Ms. Lila, she defended my mom, saying she was just trying to protect me and that I was being dramatic. It felt like betrayal, like the only person who was supposed to hear me was siding with my oppressor. When I turned 16, something happened that should have set off major red flags. But I was naive. I went to a small party in Fort Collins with some friends, keeping it secret because we knew our parents would freak. No alcohol, no drugs, just teenagers wanting to feel normal. The Monday after, I had my session with Ms. Lila. She asked how my weekend was, and I gave a vague answer. Then she said something that made my stomach flip. She knew about Fort Collins, about the party, even described the house with eerie precision. I asked her how she knew. She smiled and said she and my mom talked regularly, that my mom had been concerned about suspicious behavior and had tracked my location through my phone. I felt violated, but I didn't question why a therapist would team up with my mom to monitor me. I just felt betrayed and retreated into myself. Weeks later, this paranoia only intensified. By 17, I was at rock bottom. Depression had become unbearable, and I started making plans to end my life. I wrote notes, researched methods, and picked a date. 2 weeks before that date, my mom insisted on joining one of my sessions. I didn't want her there, but it wasn't up to me. During that session, I finally spoke honestly, probably for the first time in years. I told Ms. Lila I was exhausted, that I felt worthless, that I thought I was a burden. Maybe this time someone would hear me, get me real help. Instead, she turned to my mom and framed everything I said as manipulative and attention-seeking. She claimed I was defiant, trying to control my mom through emotions, and needed stricter boundaries. My mom nodded, agreeing. I sat there, ambushed by the 2 people who were supposed to care for me. A few days later, on my 17th birthday, I tried to end it. I took a bottle of my mom's sleeping pills and locked myself in the bathroom. I don't remember much after that, but I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. My mom cried, told me how selfish I'd been, how scared she was. No mention of Ms. Lila. No acknowledgement that the therapy I'd been in for a decade had failed me. I spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility. When I got out, my mom told me I'd be going back to Ms. Lila. For the first time, I refused. I said I didn't trust her. I needed a new therapist. My mom was furious, but eventually relented, finding me someone in Boulder who specialized in adolescent depression. I think she agreed because she was scared. My suicide attempt had been real and serious. It was during this period, at 17 and a half, that I stumbled upon something that changed everything. I was looking for my birth certificate for a college application and found a manila folder tucked under sweaters. Inside, transcripts of every session with Ms. Lila, notes on every thought and feeling I'd shared, every secret I'd trusted her with, some even recorded on CDs. My stomach dropped. My most vulnerable moments had been documented and shared with my mom, without my consent. Even worse, there were texts between my mom and Ms. Lila, coordinating strategies to control me, discussing friends, activities, and behavior. In one, my mom asked Ms. Lila to manipulate a session to make me feel guilty about a friend she disliked. In another, Ms. Lila suggested reframing my feelings of suffocation as anxiety rather than legitimate responses to my mom's control. I photographed everything and confronted my mom. She claimed she had every right to know what was happening, and that Ms. Lila was trying to help both of us. I kept pressing, and finally asked, was she even a licensed therapist? Her silence said it all. Ms. Lila wasn't a therapist. She was a college friend who taught chemistry in Jefferson County, with 0 formal mental health training. For 10 years, from ages 7 to 17, I'd been seeing someone unqualified, someone violating every ethical boundary, acting as my mother's co-conspirator. A couple months before graduating high school, I finally moved out of my mom's house. I went to live with my dad, someone I barely knew because my mom had spent my entire childhood keeping us apart. It was a fresh start, and for the first time, I felt even a tiny spark of control over my own life. I finished high school there, started college at Colorado State University, and began real therapy with a licensed psychologist in Fort Collins. For the first time, I was learning what actual healing looked like. During one session, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up Ms. Lila online, just to see if she had any public presence. What I found made my stomach churn. She had an Instagram account, and as I scrolled back through years of posts, I saw photos of me. Not ones she had snapped herself, but screenshots of my own social media posts from when I was 15. She had been following me, watching me, documenting my life outside those cabin sessions. There were pictures of me at concerts, coffee shops around Boulder, and campus events. She had never liked or commented on a single post, probably following me under a fake account, quietly archiving my life for herself. The violation I felt hit me hard. The woman who had pretended to care about my mental health had been actively surveilling me for years. I am 24 now, and I've been seeing my current therapist in Denver for 5 years. She helped me understand that what happened was abuse, a systematic manipulation and control from both my mom and Ms. Lila that left lasting damage to my mental health and my ability to trust others. I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I work through it with someone ethical, trained, and genuinely invested in my recovery. I haven't spoken to my mom in 3 years, and I have no plans to reach out to Ms. Lila. That chapter of my life is closed, but it left scars that take daily care to manage. I know now that therapy is supposed to help, not surveil. It should feel safe, not suffocating. I wasted 10 years on someone who had no business calling herself a counselor, and I refuse to let anyone else go through that. If you're reading this and recognize yourself in my story, hear me. If your therapist shares your private information without consent, makes you feel worse instead of better, or seems more interested in controlling you than helping you, you deserve real help. Therapy should never feel like punishment. Your pain is real, your feelings are valid, and you have every right to advocate for yourself. Looking back, it's surreal to think about the decade I spent trapped in that cycle. Drives up into the mountains, the smell of pine and wood smoke, hours talking about feelings that were dismissed or twisted. It all felt like an elaborate trap. I now know that the betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was systematic, orchestrated by someone who should have been trained to protect me, paired with a parent who prioritized control over love. Discovering the transcripts, the CDs, the texts, it was horrifying. Reading about how every moment I shared, every insecurity, every secret had been cataloged and weaponized against me made my skin crawl. And realizing that a woman I trusted had been monitoring my social media added a layer of violation I can still feel today. That level of intrusion is not just unethical, it's abusive. Moving forward, I've learned to trust my instincts more than anyone else. I've learned that kindness does not equal weakness, and that it's okay to set boundaries, even with parents or authority figures, when your safety or mental health is at stake. I've learned to recognize the signs of manipulation and control, and to protect myself from people who claim to help while working against me. Therapy, when done right, can be life-saving. It took me years to find someone who could actually provide that. The difference is night and day. My current therapist validates my experiences, empowers me, and provides tools to navigate the lasting impact of trauma. Recovery isn't linear, and some days are harder than others, but it's real, it's safe, and it's ethical. I still carry a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief over what happened. But I also carry strength. Strength to set boundaries. Strength to seek help. Strength to share my story, even when it's uncomfortable, in hopes that others might recognize red flags before it's too late. I've come to understand that my childhood wasn't my fault, that my pain was real, and that I deserve care that respects my autonomy and my privacy. Even now, 5 years into proper therapy, I have moments when I flash back to those drives up the mountain, the cabin sessions, the feeling of being trapped under someone else's control. But now I can name it for what it was: abuse, not weakness, not personal failure. I've learned to see those experiences through the lens of survival and resilience. The world can be cruel, and the people who are supposed to protect you aren't always trustworthy. But healing is possible. Setting boundaries, finding ethical care, reclaiming your autonomy. It's possible. It took me years to understand that, and even longer to put it into practice. But I'm living proof that you can escape manipulation and start trusting again. If you're in therapy now and something feels off, trust that feeling. If someone is sharing your private life without permission or twisting your experiences to control you, speak up. Get a second opinion. Find someone qualified and protect yourself. No one has the right to weaponize your vulnerability. For me, it's been a long road. I've rebuilt my trust, learned to value my own perspective, and surrounded myself with people who genuinely care about my well-being. I've reclaimed my life from the shadows of manipulation and control. I'm still healing, and I'll probably always carry some of the scars, but I've learned that survival is a form of strength. And for anyone reading this, your feelings are real. Your experiences are valid. You deserve care, respect, and ethical guidance. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Never let anyone tell you that your pain isn't real. Stand up for yourself, set boundaries, and know that healing, true, ethical healing, is possible. Story 3. I've always been someone who thrives on being alone. The constant buzz of city life never sat right with me, which is why I packed up after college and moved into a tiny cabin just outside Estes Park. Nothing fancy, just a single-room cabin with a wood stove, a little kitchen, and a wraparound porch that gave me a clear view of untouched wilderness for miles. The nearest neighbor lived about 3 miles down the road, and the town itself was a 20-minute drive on twisty mountain roads that got dicey once winter hit. Most people would have felt trapped or scared in that kind of isolation, but to me, it was pure freedom. I woke up to elk calling in the meadow behind the cabin, spent my days hiking off the beaten-path trails, and fell asleep to complete silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. The cabin was right at the edge of Rocky Mountain National Park, close enough to reach trailheads in minutes, but far enough from the crowds that swarmed the popular spots during peak season. I moved in late September, just as the aspens were turning gold and winter was creeping into the air. By November, I had a steady rhythm. I worked remotely as a graphic designer, earning a decent city salary while living in my mountain paradise. Most days, I'd grind from sunrise until early afternoon, then spend the remaining daylight exploring trails, taking photos, or just soaking in the quiet. I want to be clear. I'm not easily spooked. I've camped solo in Montana's grizzly country, hiked alone for miles, and handled situations most folks would run from. I understood the risks of living off the grid, and I had safeguards. Bear spray by the door, a satellite phone for emergencies, and motion sensor lights around the cabin to alert me if wildlife got too close. Most of the time, the lights were harmless, triggered by deer or a black bear passing by. But over time, I learned to read the subtle patterns of movement. Everything changed mid-November. I remember the date, November 14th, exactly 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I had gone to bed around 10 p.m. like usual. The stove was still warm from the fire I'd built earlier, and I drifted off easily. Then at 2:47 a.m., I woke to the motion sensor light on the south side of the cabin blasting the bedroom with harsh white light. I waited, expecting the rustle of an animal, a hoof crunch, anything. But there was only silence. The unnatural brightness cut through the night like a spotlight. I crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. Probably just a deer or elk that wandered too close, I thought. But when I peered outside, my blood ran cold. About 50 feet down the driveway stood a man, completely still, not walking, not looking around, just facing the cabin. The motion sensor light made him impossible to miss. He wore dark jeans and a heavy coat. I couldn't make out his face, but the way he held himself was unnerving. Arms at his sides, feet planted in the snow, staring at my cabin with a focus that felt almost alive. My heart raced, my stomach dropped. I froze, counting the seconds as if time had slowed. Then the light clicked off and darkness reclaimed the yard. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was still there. That primal awareness, something is watching you even if you can't see it. I grabbed my phone, hesitating to call the sheriff. "There's a man in my driveway." It didn't seem urgent enough for an emergency call, and I knew a deputy would take at least 30 minutes to reach me. Instead, I lit up every light inside and outside, locked all doors and windows, grabbed the bear spray, and planted myself on the couch with a clear view of the windows. Every little sound made me jump. I sat there until sunrise.
When morning finally came, I went outside. The snow was pristine, except for my footprints from the day before and some deer tracks. No boot prints, no evidence of him ever standing there. I told myself I had imagined it, that half-asleep nerves had conjured a shadow. But I knew what I had seen, and more importantly, I knew what I had felt. That wasn't a trick of the mind, it was real, visceral fear. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. Every glance out the windows made my heart jump. When night fell, I dreaded sleep. But exhaustion won, and I climbed into bed around 11 p.m., hoping it had been a one-time thing. At 2:47 a.m., the light flicked on again. I shot awake. And there he was. Same place, same rigid stance, same unnerving stillness. This time I could see more. He was tall, at least 6 feet, his coat dark green or black, hands bare in freezing weather. Something about his posture was wrong. Too stiff, too precise, too deliberately human. I called the sheriff. I explained it was the second night in a row, that I was alone and terrified. The dispatcher was kind, but skeptical. She promised a deputy would come, though it'd take time given my location. The light eventually went out, and I told her the man was gone. She suggested he could be a lost hiker or a stranded driver. The deputy came at 9 a.m., checked the property for 20 minutes, and found nothing. He suggested maybe wildlife or malfunctioning sensors. I didn't argue, but I didn't believe him either. The third night? 2:47 a.m. Same light, same figure. Fourth night, same deal. By the fifth night, sleep had vanished completely. I stayed up, lights blazing, watching the clock, waiting for 2:47 a.m. Every single night, like clockwork, the light would reveal him at the end of my driveway. I tried taking pictures with my phone, but the distance and lighting ruined them. Just a shadowy blob. By the seventh night, I had to act. I layered up, grabbed my biggest flashlight, and waited. When 2:47 rolled around, I stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand. He was there. I shouted, demanding to know who he was, what he wanted, why he was haunting my driveway. Silence. No movement. Nothing. I stepped forward, ready to confront him, but instinct screamed, "Stop!" Not fear of physical harm, something primal, like a predator alert. I retreated inside, locked the door. The next nights? No lights. No figure. Gone as suddenly as it had appeared. I stayed for another month, but never felt comfortable again. Nights were sleepless, haunted by anticipation. I eventually moved to a small apartment in town. I still don't know what I saw that week in November. Rational explanations, sleepwalking strangers, pranks, hallucinations, don't match the timing, the precision, or the sudden disappearance. I will never live anywhere that isolated again. I keep blinds closed at night, and I've never felt completely safe in the Colorado wilderness I once adored. After moving into town, I thought I'd escaped whatever had been stalking me out at the cabin. For the first couple of weeks, life felt almost normal. I found a small apartment on the edge of Estes Park proper, closer to neighbors, streetlights, and the occasional passerby. The city noise was annoying at first, but it gave me comfort. I wasn't completely alone anymore. I could leave my apartment without that constant feeling of being watched. But even in town, I couldn't shake the residue of what happened at the cabin.
Every time I passed a shadow in an alley or saw a figure pause on the sidewalk, my body tensed. My mind would race. Is it him? Could it be him? Sleep was still rough. I'd lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds until 2:47 a.m., half expecting a motion sensor light to flare on, even though there wasn't one here. Work became my escape. I threw myself into design projects, deadlines, and Zoom calls with clients in Denver, trying to fill the void with productivity. But no amount of work could erase the memory of those nights. I started noticing patterns I hadn't before. Little things, footsteps behind me when the hallway was empty, the feeling of eyes on my back while walking through stores, the sense that someone knew my routine. It was paranoia, maybe, but it was too consistent to be random. Then came the day I ran into him again. I was walking home from the grocery store in broad daylight, my backpack loaded with essentials, when I caught a glimpse of someone across the street. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but he was unmistakable. Tall, heavy coat, dark jeans, hands empty but stiff at his sides. He wasn't hiding, didn't attempt to blend in, just stood there staring at me before turning the corner. My heart sank, and I felt that old, frozen panic clawing up my throat. I didn't follow him. I didn't run. I just kept walking, but I knew it wasn't over. He was tracking me, or had been. The realization was chilling. Everything I'd thought was private, my routines, my movements, even the simple act of going to the store, had been observed. I started carrying pepper spray with me everywhere, scanning streets, parking lots, and alleyways. I changed my jogging routes, varied the times I left my apartment, and began locking every door and window before sunset. Even then, the fear gnawed at me. I wasn't living, I was surviving, counting the moments until I could return to a safe space, even if that safety was just a temporary illusion. A week later, something else happened that made my stomach twist. I was walking past a local coffee shop when I saw a truck parked across the street. Blue, beat up, with a peeling Broncos bumper sticker. Exactly like the one I'd glimpsed outside the cabin and near the light rail station months before. My pulse shot up. I froze, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence. But I couldn't. The truck lingered just long enough for me to see him, or someone identical to him, peek around the side. That night, I broke. I realized I couldn't keep running. I needed a confrontation, closure, or at least the knowledge that I wasn't imagining it. I stayed up, planning, rehearsing what I would say. I grabbed my phone, a flashlight, and my pepper spray, ready to document everything. The next day, I spotted him again in a parking lot near campus. I took a deep breath and approached, my heart hammering. I pulled out my phone, held it like a weapon, and said loudly, "I know you've been following me. I know you've been watching me for months. Stop. I've called the police." My voice echoed, shaky but firm. He froze, a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, maybe surprise. He muttered that I was mistaken, that he didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't flinch, kept the phone pointed at him, and stared him down. After a tense moment, he climbed into that same beat-up truck and drove away, disappearing into traffic. I never saw him again. Even so, the experience left scars. I changed my routines, locked down every aspect of my life, and installed cameras around my apartment. I had proof now, digital and photographic, that this wasn't imagination. Still, the anxiety lingered. Even months later, I flinched at sudden movements, double-checked locks, and hesitated to trust strangers. It was a lesson I wish I hadn't needed to learn. Kindness can be mistaken for vulnerability, politeness for weakness. Some people see boundaries as invitations, and for those of us who prefer solitude, that can be deadly. I realize the world isn't always safe, even in places that feel remote, even when you think you're prepared. The Colorado wilderness I had loved, the peace, the quiet, the sense of freedom, was forever tainted. I never went back to that cabin. I couldn't. Every tree, every trail, every shadow in the corner of my vision was a reminder. I found another apartment closer to town, still surrounded by mountains, but I refused to live completely alone again. Safety, I learned, was not a luxury. It was a necessity. I also learned to trust myself, instincts over politeness. That primal gut feeling, the one telling me something is wrong, is not paranoia. It's survival. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything that felt off, every stranger who lingered too long, every motion sensor trigger. That record became my lifeline, my proof that I was right to fear. Years later, I still carry that memory with me. I don't tell many people. They'd probably chalk it up to stress, isolation, or overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And the uncertainty, the not knowing why or who, is part of what makes it linger, what makes the fear stay alive. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't wander the wilderness without backup. I avoid isolated cabins. I keep my social media private, my routines varied, my lights on at night. And though I've returned to some trails in daylight, I never forget. Freedom comes with vigilance. Solitude comes with caution. And peace in the mountains is fragile, fleeting, and sometimes impossible to reclaim. Whatever or whoever that figure was, it changed me forever. I escaped physically, but the emotional imprint lingers. I'll always scan the dark edges of roads, the shadows by the trees, and the driveways I pass in silence. Some lessons aren't about logic. They're about survival, instincts, and the understanding that the world is far a stranger and far more dangerous than we like to believe. Story 4. I landed my first legit job when I was 15, working as a server at an upscale spot in Manitou Springs called Eagle's Perch. The restaurant sat on a hillside, offering massive picture windows that framed Pikes Peak and the distant red spires of Garden of the Gods. It was one of those places where tourists with cash came for a fancy meal to go along with the scenic views. The pay wasn't bad for a teen, especially with tips, and I felt a thrill of independence having my own money. What I didn't realize, though, was that serving people would expose me to some truly uncomfortable dynamics. Some customers see teenagers as easy targets rather than humans doing a job. I got my first real taste of that on Easter Sunday in 2022. I remember it vividly because the place was slammed from brunch straight through dinner. I had been at Eagle's Perch for about 3 months, confident enough in my skills to feel capable, but still nervous enough to want to please everyone and avoid mistakes. Around 2 p.m., a man came in alone and asked to be seated in my section. He looked to be in his late 50s, heavy-set, thinning gray hair, and glasses that seemed way too small for his face. He carried a plastic grocery bag, which felt out of place in such a polished setting, but I didn't think much of it at first. When I approached him to take his drink order, his smile immediately set off alarm bells. It wasn't a warm, friendly grin. It lingered, unsettling, with an undertone I couldn't place but instinctively wanted to avoid. He asked for water with lemon, said he was in no rush, and then casually pulled a carton of eggs out of the bag and set it on the table. I blinked, unsure what to say. Do you want those refrigerated? Or is that part of your meal? He chuckled. Nah, just reminds me of Easter back when I was a kid. I like carrying eggs with me on the holiday. It was strange, but I was 15 and trying to stay professional, so I nodded and got his water. Over nearly 2 hours,
He asked increasingly personal questions. How old I was, what school I went to, my hobbies, if I had a boyfriend. Each one chipped away at my comfort zone. I had been trained to smile, chat, and keep customers happy, so I answered vaguely. High school. Love hiking and reading. Too busy to date. He seemed pleased, occasionally commenting on how mature I sounded or how pretty I was. When he finally left, he tipped me $40 on a $30 check. Generous, sure, but it came with a vibe I couldn't shake. I thought that would be it, just another awkward encounter. But he returned the next week, and the week after that, eventually showing up multiple times a week. Always in my section, always asking personal questions, always carrying the eggs like some private ritual. I mentioned it to my manager, Samantha, a woman in her early 30s. She told me to stay polite, professional, and speak up if he crossed a line. But what counts as crossing a line when every interaction feels wrong without anything explicitly inappropriate? By summer 2022, he had become a regular fixture in my life. I learned his name from receipts, but won't share it here. He began casually asking me out. Coffee, a hike at Garden of the Gods, but I declined, explaining I couldn't date customers and was too young anyway. He laughed it off, calling it friendly, but the questions never stopped. Soon, he was tracking my schedule, figuring out when I worked so he could plan visits. Then came the touches. At first, small, dismissible things. Hand on my shoulder when I brought food, brushing fingers when handing me his credit card. Once, when I cleared his table, he touched the small of my back for several seconds while complimenting my service. I flinched. He apologized, but there was a look in his eyes that told me it was deliberate. I finally told Samantha I couldn't serve him anymore. She agreed to seat him with other servers. For a few weeks it worked. He'd scan the room, sigh, and reluctantly sit elsewhere. But soon he'd walk past me, stopping to chat or ask questions. Other servers noticed, some joking about having a secret admirer, others warning me it was obsessive. In August 2022, it escalated beyond the restaurant. I was browsing downtown Manitou Springs on my day off when I saw him across the street, half hidden behind a store display, staring at me. Our eyes met, and he started crossing toward me. I panicked and ducked into a crystal and souvenir shop, watching him linger, confused, before walking away. That moment crushed me. He wasn't just a regular anymore, he was following me, tracking me, showing up where he had no business being. I told my parents. My dad insisted on driving me to and from work for weeks. He also went to Eagle's Perch to speak with the general manager, Brian, who had authority to ban patrons. Brian acknowledged the situation had escalated and promised to bar the man from the restaurant. The next time he came in, on a Saturday night in mid-September, Brian met him at the door. The man demanded to know why he was banned. Brian didn't offer specifics, only that his behavior toward staff had been inappropriate and the ban was final. Apparently, he asked if it had to do with me. None of us understood how he even knew my name. I never wore a name tag. Brian escorted him out, and I hoped it was over. For a while, it seemed like the ban had worked. Weeks passed, and I slowly began to relax, feeling like I could walk around Manitou Springs without constantly scanning for him. But in late October 2022, while finishing a late shift at Eagle's Perch, I walked to my car around 10 p.m. and noticed something on the windshield. The parking lot was dimly lit, just a few flickering overhead lamps casting more shadows than light. Tucked under my wiper was a plastic bag. Inside was a carton of eggs, like the ones he'd carried into the restaurant, and a handwritten note. Happy early Easter. I miss our talks. Hope you're doing well. My blood ran cold. I spun around, hyper-aware of every shadow and sound, but saw no one.
I grabbed the bag carefully, trying not to touch more than necessary, and hurried inside to show Brian. He immediately called the Colorado Springs Police Department, and an officer came to take my statement. I explained the whole history, handed over the note and eggs. The officer listened and was kind, taking me seriously, but explained that unless he made threats or tried to harm me physically, there wasn't much they could do beyond documenting the incident. A restraining order could be filed if the harassment continued, but proactive prevention was limited. My parents were worried, insisting I quit Eagle's Perch. They feared he now knew exactly where I worked and could find me easily. Reluctantly, I agreed. I loved the job and the independence it gave me, but the risk was too high. I found a retail position in a different part of Colorado Springs, somewhere he likely wouldn't think to check, and deleted all social media accounts that contained identifying info. For months, paranoia clung to me. Crowds felt dangerous. Any man vaguely resembling him made me tense. I avoided Manitou Springs entirely, a town I had once loved. Despite all precautions, the fear lingered. Over 2 years had passed since I last saw him or heard from him, and the police report never led to charges. He never reached out again after leaving that eerie note on my car. I have no idea if he moved, lost interest, or turned his attention to someone else. I've graduated high school and started college at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I still work in customer service because I need the income, but I've become hyper-aware of potential predators. I notice repeat customers, flag those asking excessive personal questions, and set boundaries without hesitation, even if it means being seen as curt or unfriendly. What unsettles me most is how often people dismiss this type of behavior as harmless. Coworkers joked about me having a secret admirer. Some customers suggested I should feel flattered. Even friends offered explanations that minimized my experience, saying he was probably just lonely or socially awkward. But I know what I felt each time he entered the restaurant. That lingering smile, the unauthorized touches, the sense of being tracked. It wasn't loneliness or awkwardness. It was predatory. I count myself lucky. The harassment never escalated into physical assault, but the psychological toll was severe. Constant vigilance became my norm. The freedom I once felt in Colorado, the wide open spaces, the mountains, the trails, now carries a shadow. I carry the lessons of vigilance into every interaction, teaching myself to trust instincts over reassurances, to prioritize safety over politeness. Looking back, the whole experience was an education in boundaries, consent, and personal safety. It exposed how vulnerable teens can be in public-facing roles, and how easy it is for adults to exploit authority, charm, or a perceived power imbalance. Most importantly, it taught me that my discomfort was valid, that my instincts were correct, and that being polite should never override my right to feel safe. Even today, when I walk through a crowded campus or navigate downtown streets, I carry a heightened awareness. I plan escape routes, note exits, and mentally log who is around me. It's exhausting, but necessary. The memory of him standing outside that store, lurking, refusing to leave me alone, will stay with me for life. And while the fear has dulled, it hasn't vanished entirely. The eggs, the note, the smirk, small symbolic markers of intrusion that I will never forget. I often wonder what happened to him after that note. Did he move? Did he fixate on someone else? Did he learn a lesson? I'll never know. What I do know is that I survived, and I learned to advocate for myself in ways I hadn't before. I realized the importance of telling someone, of taking threats, even subtle psychological ones, seriously, and of setting firm boundaries even when others try to minimize or dismiss your fears.
There's a bitter irony in working in customer service now. I'm often in roles where politeness and charm are expected, yet I have to navigate interactions with a trained sense of caution. I can't allow myself to be vulnerable in the same way I was at 15. And while it has made me stronger and more assertive, it's also left a permanent scar. A reminder that predators often operate in plain sight, disguised as friendly regulars or harmless admirers. I share this story now because I want others, especially young workers, to understand that their feelings matter. That discomfort is not overreacting. That a smile, a gift, a seemingly friendly gesture can sometimes be a warning sign. And that speaking up, even when it's inconvenient, embarrassing, or scary, can protect you from harm. So much of this ordeal felt isolating because the reactions of people around me initially minimized the danger. If a customer or a colleague notices something odd, trust them. Validate their feelings. And if you're in a position of authority, act decisively to prevent escalation. Sometimes that's the difference between ongoing harassment and relief, between fear and safety. 2 years later, I still work in service jobs, but I approach them differently. I pay attention, set boundaries, and take nothing for granted. I make sure I know who is in my space and how far I let anyone enter it. I am vigilant, cautious, and proactive. That lesson cost me peace of mind, but it also taught me to value my own instincts, my safety, and my agency above all else. Some days, I replay those Easter Sundays, the lingering smiles, the carton of eggs, the handwritten note, the strange shadow in the parking lot. And I am grateful that it ended without physical violence, that I have the ability to share my story, and that I now know what red flags to trust. For anyone reading this who might experience something similar, listen to yourself, take it seriously, and know you are never overreacting. Your comfort and safety matter more than anyone else's perception of politeness or social norms. Story 5. My boyfriend Jake and I had been together for 3 years when we decided to mark our anniversary with a getaway to Colorado. At the time, we were living in Kansas, and neither of us had much experience with mountain landscapes, so the Rockies seemed like the perfect escape. We wanted something secluded and quiet, far from tourist traffic and city noise. After scrolling through dozens of Airbnb options, we found what looked like a dream spot, a modern, stilted cabin in the Black Forest region, just outside Colorado Springs, surrounded by miles of ponderosa pines and scrub oak. The listing showed floor-to-ceiling windows, a clean, minimalist interior, and a deck that overlooked endless forest. It emphasized total privacy. No neighbors for miles, no cell service. So we'd have to rely on the cabin's Wi-Fi if we needed to reach the outside world. We booked it for a long weekend in October and drove the 8 hours from Kansas to Colorado. Our first day was spent exploring Colorado Springs, wandering the Garden of the Gods, grabbing lunch at a downtown brewery, and driving up Pikes Peak to soak in the views. By evening, we were ready to head to the cabin for a quiet night. The Airbnb directions led us off the main road onto narrower dirt tracks snaking through dense forest. The last 45 minutes felt like driving through nowhere, along gravel paths with deep ruts and branches scraping the sides of Jake's truck. We didn't pass a single car or any signs of civilization, just endless trees stretching as far as the eye could see. When we finally reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows and wrapping the forest in the kind of stillness you only get when you're truly isolated. The cabin matched the photos perfectly. Perched on stilts, accessed by wooden stairs, sleek and modern. But from the moment we stepped out of the truck, something felt off. The air was too still, too quiet, and a prickling sensation ran down my spine. Jake felt it too, saying it seemed like we were being watched. We laughed it off, blaming too many true crime podcasts. We climbed the stairs, punched in the host's key code, and stepped inside.
The cabin was stunning, with exposed beams and enormous windows that made it feel like we were floating in the treetops. Yet small details unsettled me. Towels in the bathroom were half folded or crumpled on the floor. In the bedroom, the comforter was crooked, like someone had left in a hurry. On the deck, a pair of scratched sunglasses lay on the railing. Jake assumed previous guests had left them, but the listing had stated the cabin was thoroughly cleaned after each stay. There were also deep scratches on the sliding glass door frame, clustered around the handle and lock, as if someone had tried to force it open. Jake suggested maybe a dog had done it, but the height and angle were all wrong. Too deliberate, too precise. I snapped a photo out of curiosity, and we agreed to just enjoy our evening. We cooked in the tiny kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, and danced in the living room, laughing at ourselves for acting ridiculous in the middle of nowhere. Around 9 p.m., Jake suggested a short drive down some back roads to look for wildlife, or just explore. We drove for 20 minutes with the windows down, music playing, eventually stopping to gaze at the stars. The sky was breathtaking, clear, filled with more stars than I'd ever seen. Jake jokingly cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled into the forest, calling for Bigfoot like some cheesy horror flick. We laughed, joined in, and then fell silent, soaking in the stillness. Returning around 10:30 p.m., we climbed the stairs toward the cabin. Jake asked what the code was, and I blurted out, 1289. He paused, giving me a look, then loudly corrected me. No, it's 3572. I realized he was giving any potential eavesdropper false information. At the time, it felt paranoid, but we laughed it off and went inside. We stayed up an hour or so, finishing wine, before heading to bed around midnight. The bedroom was at the far end of the cabin, separated by a short hallway. Those floor-to-ceiling windows that made the cabin magical during the day now felt vulnerable at night. Outside, I could only make out dark tree silhouettes, and my imagination conjured faces watching us. Jake fell asleep quickly. I lay awake listening to the cabin settling and wind through the pines. Around 1 a.m., I was jolted awake by the electronic beeping of the keypad on the front door. Beep, 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 beep. Pause. Error tone. Then it repeated. Someone was trying to enter a code. My heart stopped. I shook Jake awake, whispering urgently that someone was outside. He grabbed a kitchen knife, and I had my phone ready to call 911, though we weren't sure the signal would reach. The beeping continued, methodical, unhurried, each attempt followed by an error tone. Then it stopped. Silence. But the realization hit. Whoever was outside had heard our fake code, 3572. 4 attempts, 4 error tones. They were close enough to eavesdrop, close enough to follow us back. That cabin's minor oddities suddenly made sense. The half-folded towels, the abandoned sunglasses, the scratches on the door. This was not a random occurrence. Someone had been here, and we had walked right into it. As soon as dawn broke, we packed everything quickly, skipping breakfast or showers, just wanting out. Jake circled the cabin, looking for signs of who might have been lurking. But the ground, littered with pine needles, held little evidence. The only clue was a cigarette butt at the base of the stairs, and neither of us smoked. We drove straight back to Kansas, stopping only for gas and food. During the drive, I kept glancing in the rear view, half expecting someone to be following us. Once home, I left a detailed review on the Airbnb, warning other travelers and recounting our experience. The host responded almost immediately, insisting we must have imagined it, claiming no previous security complaints had been reported. A few days later, Airbnb removed the review, stating it violated terms by making unverified accusations. I replay the night over and over in my mind. How close we came to something terrible. How a simple joke about a fake code might have been the only thing keeping a stranger out while we slept. I think about future guests who could have been warned if the review had stayed online, and about whoever had been out there, lurking in the Black Forest, waiting for a chance. We haven't returned to Colorado since. Some places are meant to be escapes, but that cabin, beautiful in photos, was anything but safe. Every time I close my eyes, I see the darkness outside those floor-to-ceiling windows, the scratch marks, and the evidence that someone had been watching us. The experience has changed how I view seclusion and safety. I've become hyper-aware of surroundings, cautious in rentals, and vigilant when it comes to security. Small details that once seemed insignificant now feel like warnings. It's exhausting, but necessary. I've learned to trust my instincts, take unease seriously, and never assume isolation is safe. Even now, I think about that night and how fragile the illusion of safety can be. How easily a peaceful, romantic getaway can turn terrifying. I remind myself that caution is not paranoia and that personal safety must always come first. The cabin in the Black Forest will forever be a place of anxiety in my memory, a reminder that even the most picturesque hideaways can hide danger. Story 6. I grew up in a little town called Rio Mesa, tucked into the San Luis Valley down in southern Colorado. The kind of place where folks still wave at strangers, and nobody bothers locking their doors unless the wind starts tossing them open. The valley itself is this huge, open bowl of land, flat as a table and ringed by mountains that always look way closer than they really are. As a kid, I thought the world ended at those peaks. The sun hung around late in the summer, stretching out the daylight until almost 9 at night, which meant my friends and I could run around forever without our parents getting nervous. Everyone always said Rio Mesa was safe. Safe. Until one night proved that no place really is. I was 8 years old. Still that age where your bike feels like a rocket ship, and every summer evening feels like freedom. It was late August, maybe a week before school started. The air had already begun to cool off in the evenings, the kind of chill that made you zip up a jacket, even though it had been blazing hot earlier. My best friend, Lily, and I had met up with a bunch of neighborhood kids, mostly boys a couple years older than us. The oldest was Zach, a 16-year-old we all idolized because he had a fancy mountain bike and claimed he knew every shortcut and secret path in the valley. There were maybe 5 or 6 of us total, riding in this sloppy cluster around the quiet streets near my grandparents' house on the edge of town. Out there, the road gave way to miles of open fields and old ranch land dotted with rusted tractors and grazing cows. We weren't doing anything special, just looping the same blocks, talking about nothing, bragging about who could ride faster or who had almost seen a mountain lion last week. The street lamps threw these little pools of orange light every few houses, and in between them were long strips of pure darkness where our bikes zipped through shadow like ghosts. I remember feeling so grown and important riding with the older kids, trying hard to laugh at their jokes even when I didn't understand them. We'd been riding maybe an hour when we turned down a lonely street that ran parallel to the main road heading toward the farms. That's when someone stepped out of the dark. 1 second the street was empty, the next, a man was right in front of me. I slammed my brakes, my tires skidding on the asphalt, stopping just a couple feet from hitting him. The rest of the kids stopped behind me, forming this messy ring of bikes and confused whispering. I recognized the man, but not in a comforting way. Rio Mesa had a few locals who hung around the liquor store, pushing shopping carts full of their belongings or sleeping on park benches. You learned to cross the street or pedal a little faster when you saw them. This man was one of them, one I'd seen plenty of times from a distance. Up close, he was terrifying. He looked like he was somewhere between 40 and 60, but it was impossible to tell, because his face was worn down like old leather left out in the sun. His eyes were red and glassy, drifting in and out of focus like he was trying to remember where reality was. He smelled awful. A sharp mix of booze, sweat, and something rotten I couldn't place but made my stomach roll. He wobbled on his feet, swaying like the ground wouldn't stay still under him. But his hands were what I remember most. They were sliced up, covered in tiny cuts and scabs, some still bleeding. His fingernails were cracked and filthy, like he'd been digging in dirt or clawing at something. Before I could think or move, he lunged. His hand shot out and clamped around my arm, right above the elbow. His grip was iron. I mean, it hurt instantly, the kind of pain that makes your whole body freeze. I couldn't even breathe. He yanked me closer until I could smell his breath on my face, hot and sour and full of stale alcohol. His voice came out rough and dragged out, each word like he had to wrestle it out of his throat. "Where are my cigarettes?" His eyes weren't really looking at me. They were aimed at me, but he wasn't seeing me. I felt like an object he'd picked up by mistake. I stammered out, I don't have any. Or maybe, I don't know. Or maybe I said nothing. My mind was white noise. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my ears. His fingers dug deeper into my arm as he repeated the question. Slower this time, but way more threatening. "Where are my cigarettes?" I tried pulling back, but he held tight. Panic washed through me like ice water. I repeated that I didn't have anything, but my voice cracked, shaking so badly it barely sounded like me. He asked again, a third time, and something inside me snapped. I screamed. I'm not talking a normal kid scream. It was raw, loud, animal-level terror. The kind of scream you don't know you can make until something jolts it out of you. It echoed across the empty street, bouncing off houses, ringing in my own chest. And then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. My friends were leaving. Every single one of them, even Zach, the cool 16-year-old, spun their bikes around and pedaled away as fast as they could. No yelling, no telling him to stop, no looking back. Just gone. They left me. That part hit almost harder than the man grabbing me, realizing I was completely alone with him. But maybe my scream did something, because the man blinked like he'd just woken up from a trance. He looked at his own hand clutching my arm, then let go. Just like that. No apology, no explanation. His face sagged, confused, and then he stepped back. I didn't wait a single second. I jumped on my bike and pedaled like my life depended on it, because it probably did. My grandparents' house was maybe 200 yards away. I flew down that road, legs burning, breath heaving, tears streaming down my face. I burst through the front door, sobbing so hard I couldn't speak. Words came out jumbled, broken, useless. My grandma didn't need details. She saw my face and knew something was wrong. Then she looked out the window, and her expression changed completely. The man was coming up the driveway. My grandma's face went pale in a way I'd never seen before. She wasn't the type to scare easily. She'd lived through blizzards, rattlesnakes in the shed, and losing livestock to mountain lions. But seeing that man staggering up her driveway, that shook her. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She just grabbed my shoulders, pulled me behind her, and slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the glass. Then she flipped the deadbolt. Then the chain. Then the secondary lock my grandpa had installed years ago, just in case. I was still crying so hard I could barely stand, my whole arm throbbing where he had grabbed me. My grandma crouched down, holding me tightly while trying to calm me, but I could feel her heart pounding against my shoulder. Outside, gravel crunched. The man stepped onto the porch. My grandma rose slowly and walked to the window beside the door. She didn't open the curtain, just lifted the edge enough to peek out. Her whole posture tensed. "He's right there," she whispered. I didn't want to look, but I could hear him breathing through the door. Heavy breaths, ragged and uneven, like someone climbing a mountain. Then came a soft, dragging sound, his fingers brushing against the wood. My grandma told me to stay behind her and to keep quiet. She stood perfectly still, watching the silhouette on the other side of the glass. The porch light illuminated him enough to make out his shape. Slumped shoulders, swaying slightly, one arm hanging, the other reaching up toward the doorframe as if trying to steady himself. Then he knocked. Not a normal knock, more like the sound of dull fists thudding against solid wood with no rhythm, no intention, just pressure. Like he didn't know what he was trying to do. The sound made my skin crawl. My grandma didn't answer. She didn't move. She just stared at the door, jaw clenched so tightly I could hear her teeth grind. He knocked again. Then he muttered something. It wasn't clear, a slushy mix of half-words and aimless syllables. But I caught one phrase through the fog of his voice. "I need them." My grandma whispered, "Lord help us," under her breath. He knocked again, harder this time, and the door shook. With every hit, it felt like he was becoming more awake, more aware, more upset. My grandma grabbed the landline phone, the old beige one mounted on the kitchen wall, and dialed the sheriff. She whispered quickly, telling them someone was at our house, that he had grabbed me, that he wouldn't leave. While she talked, I watched the man lean forward until his forehead pressed against the glass pane in the door. The porch light showed every crack in his skin, every bead of sweat, every wild movement of his eyes. He stared into the house like he was trying to see through the curtains, scanning for any sign of us. Then his bloody hand slapped against the window. I shrieked, and my grandma slammed her palm over my mouth to muffle the sound. But it was too late. He heard me. He turned his head toward the noise, sharply, unnaturally, like a puppet yanked by strings. His eyes focused, for the first time, directly where we stood. And he smiled. It was small, crooked, and empty. A smile without warmth or purpose. A smile that said he wasn't in control of himself. He whispered something again, breath fogging the glass. "Found you." My grandma lost her patience then. She yelled through the door, "Get off my porch! The sheriff is coming!" For a moment, everything stopped. He froze, hand still on the glass. Then he started pounding, not knocking, pounding, with both fists, over and over. The door shook so violently the frame vibrated. My grandma grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the kitchen and positioned herself in front of me, ready to swing if he forced his way in. I'll never forget the sound of his fists, wet, sloppy thuds that echoed through the whole house. And then, sirens. Faint at first, a distant wail floating across the valley. The man paused mid-swing. His shoulders tightened, and he slowly turned his head toward the sound like he was remembering something important. Then he bolted, just turned and sprinted, or as close to sprinting as his condition allowed, stumbling across the driveway and disappearing into the dark between the houses. The sheriff's SUV appeared less than 30 seconds later, lights flashing silently. They swept the property with flashlights, walked the perimeter, checked the shed, even looked under the porch. But he was gone. Vanished. They took my statement, though I could barely get words out between sobs. They took my grandma's, too, along with a description of the man. The deputy nodded knowingly. "We know him," he said. "He drifts through the valley. Harmless most days. Other days, not so much." Harmless. The bruise blooming on my arm said otherwise. They promised to patrol the area for the next few nights and told us to lock our doors. Something my grandparents had apparently never bothered to do, except during storms. I slept in my grandparents' room that night, wide awake, staring at the crack under the door where the hallway light leaked in. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every gust of wind made me think he was back. But he never returned. The next morning, my grandma made a decision. She called my parents, told them everything, and insisted that from now on, I would never ride around the neighborhood after dark. And I didn't. For a long time, I couldn't even bike past that stretch of street without feeling my stomach twist into knots. But the worst part wasn't the man. The worst part was knowing that when danger came out of the darkness, every single kid I rode with fled and left me behind. That was the night I learned fear, real fear, doesn't always come from monsters. Sometimes it comes from realizing who won't save you. Story 7. I want to start by saying this straight up. I've always been careful when it comes to online dating. I know the drill. I've heard all the nightmare scenarios, watched all the cautionary TikToks, and told myself I'd never end up on one of those "this could have gone way worse" stories. I do the basics: meet in public places, share my location with a friend, trust my gut when something feels off. All the usual safety rules we repeat to each other like gospel. But here's the truth nobody likes to admit. Sometimes you can do everything right and still end up in a situation that makes your whole body go cold. A situation where you start rethinking every choice that led you there. A situation where the person you thought you were meeting turns out to be someone entirely different. Someone you don't realize you should fear until you're already in their space and the door has clicked shut behind you. I live in the Denver metro area, and like a lot of gay guys in their 20s, I use dating apps. It's not ideal. I'd love to meet someone through friends or mutual interests, or at a bar that isn't unbearably loud. But the reality is that apps are how most of us connect these days, especially in the LGBTQ community. So I'd been on and off different apps for a couple years, mostly chatting, sometimes going on first dates that never got past polite small talk. Mildly disappointing, but nothing dangerous. Then, summer of 2023, I matched with a guy I'll call Elias. His profile looked normal. Boringly normal, actually. Late 20s, worked in tech, into hiking, craft coffee, and indie music. His pictures showed a decent-looking dude with messy dark hair, glasses, a shy smile. Nothing weird. Nothing that made me pause. When we started messaging, we got along easily. He was funny, thoughtful, charming in that introverted but witty way. We talked for about a week, and he eventually asked if I wanted to meet up. We picked a busy coffee shop in Aurora, right between his neighborhood and mine. Afternoon, public place, broad daylight. All boxes checked. But the day before we were supposed to meet, he messaged me saying he was feeling rough and asked if I wanted to just chill at his place instead. Watch a movie, order food, keep things low-key. Every part of me knew this was a bad idea. Meeting someone at their home for a first date is one of those universal don't do it rules. But he'd been so normal for days, so consistent, so harmless. I told myself I was being overly cautious, that he probably was just tired or anxious, that introverts sometimes bail on public plans. I convinced myself everything was fine. Spoiler, it wasn't. Saturday evening, I pulled into his apartment complex. The standard Colorado kind with beige buildings, identical balconies, and parking lots that wind around like a maze. Elias met me at the door. He looked like his photos, which was a relief, and he gave me a friendly smile. His roommate was in the living room playing video games, headset on, barely noticing us. I said a quick hello, mostly to reassure myself that there was another human nearby. Elias didn't linger. He led me down the hall to his bedroom and shut the door. And that's when the vibe shifted. The room was dark, except for a handful of candles scattered around. It didn't feel romantic or cozy. It felt staged, dim, wrong. As my eyes adjusted, I started realizing what I was looking at. Altars. Not one, not two, several. All over the room, on shelves, on the floor, on the windowsill. Each packed with objects arranged too carefully to be random. The first one I noticed had a jar filled with a murky yellow liquid, surrounded by tiny animal skulls. Another had a doll sitting upright with its eyes sewn shut and its hands removed, encircled by lit candles that must have been burning before I even arrived. There were bones, feathers, dried plants bundled with twine, and other things I couldn't identify no matter how hard I tried. My stomach sank. Every instinct in me tensed. Elias noticed my reaction and smiled like this was all perfectly normal. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. I pointed at one of the altars and asked what it was for, trying hard not to sound freaked out. He brushed the question aside, said he'd explain later. Wanted us to sit and relax first. That didn't help. At all. But I was caught off guard and unsure of how to react without being rude, so I hesitated. Maybe this was some kind of spiritual practice. Maybe it was cultural. Maybe it wasn't creepy, just unfamiliar. So I sat on the small couch against one wall while he queued up a show on his laptop. For a few minutes, things seemed normal. We chatted, joked around a little, and I started to think maybe I was overreacting. Then I asked again about one of the altars. He snapped. And I don't mean annoyed. I mean full-on sharp, aggressive, "Don't touch that," in a tone that made my heart stop. I hadn't gone anywhere near it. I was feet away. But he reacted like I'd violated some sacred boundary. I apologized out of instinct, and just like flipping a switch, he went back to smiling. Friendly, calm, as if nothing happened. That set the tone for the rest of the night. He'd be sweet and warm one minute, asking questions about my hobbies. Then cold, irritated, staring at me with this intensity I couldn't shake. At one point, trying to break the tension, I suggested maybe his roommate could watch the show with us. Just casual. Just trying to make things less isolating. He shoved me back onto the couch. Not enough to injure me, but enough to show he could. His face lit up with rage as he went on a rant about how much he hated his roommate. His voice was so full of resentment, it made my skin crawl. Then he calmed down again and smiled. Like nothing had happened. That's when I excused myself to get a glass of water, mostly just trying to breathe and collect myself. In the kitchen, the roommate was asleep on the couch, so I couldn't ask him anything. Couldn't even confirm if this behavior was normal. I took my time, hoping Elias would cool off. When I walked back into the bedroom, he was kneeling on the floor in front of one of the altars, eyes closed, lips moving silently. I froze in the doorway. I watched for 30 seconds, maybe more, before speaking his name. He didn't answer. I said it again. Then he opened his eyes, stood up casually, sat back on the couch, and hit play on the laptop. Like I hadn't just caught him mid-ritual. I sat next to him again, heart pounding. Everything in me screaming that I needed to leave. But the night wasn't done escalating. Not even close. The moment I sat back down beside him, I could feel the air in the room had changed completely. It wasn't just awkward anymore. It was charged, heavy, like the atmosphere right before a thunderstorm breaks open. I tried pretending everything was normal, watching the episode play on the laptop, but I couldn't focus on a single scene. My mind was running through escape plans. My pulse was loud in my ears. I decided I had to leave. I didn't care if it felt rude. I didn't care if it made things awkward. Something inside me kept telling me I was in danger, and that something was getting louder by the minute. So I stood up. "Hey," I said carefully. "My friend needs me to head out soon. I didn't realize the time." And right there, his whole expression twisted. Not angry at first, just calculating. Like he was running a mental equation and didn't like the result. "You're leaving?" he asked quietly. Only it wasn't really a question. It sounded more like a challenge. "Yeah, I should get going," I said, doing my best to sound casual. He stared at me for a long moment, eyes blank in a way that felt wrong, like there was nothing human behind them for a second. Then he shook his head slowly. "You always do this," he muttered. I blinked. "Do what?" He didn't answer. He just stood up and moved toward the door. At first, I thought he was walking me out. But when he reached it, he didn't open it. He locked it, very calmly. Then he turned around and leaned against the door like a barricade. That's when my stomach truly dropped. My hands instinctively curled into fists, not to fight, but because I was trying not to shake. "Elias," I said carefully, "I really need to go." "You're not listening," he shot back, voice rising again. "You said you'd hang out tonight." "I did," I replied. "And we did. But it's getting late and I need to leave, that's all." He took one slow step toward me. The candles flickered behind him, stretching his shadow across the wall in a way that made the whole room feel claustrophobic. "You don't get it," he said. "I don't let people walk out on me." My heart stopped. Those exact words, those were the kind you only hear in news stories and true crime podcasts. The kind that signal you're past the point of, maybe I'm overreacting, and fully in the realm of danger. "I'm not walking out on you," I said softly. "I just need to get home, that's all." He tilted his head like he was studying me. Then, out of nowhere, his voice softened again. "I thought we had a connection." The switch, from hostile to vulnerable, was so fast it made me dizzy. It wasn't natural. It wasn't normal. It felt like talking to someone wearing different faces and choosing one at random. "We do," I lied. "We can hang out again soon. I promise." That seemed to soothe him a little. His shoulders dropped. His breath slowed. Then he turned back to the door, unlocked it, and stepped aside. My fight-or-flight instinct was screaming, "Run!" but I forced myself not to rush or look afraid. Panic might trigger him again. So I walked slowly toward the door, my body stiff, my face neutral. Every step felt like a mile. I made it to the hallway. I stepped out of the room. And then I heard him behind me, not following, whispering. Whispering something in a language I didn't recognize. The same low rhythm he'd been chanting on the floor earlier. I didn't look back. His roommate was still asleep on the couch in the living room, headphones on, oblivious. I moved past him and reached the front door, forcing my shaking hands to stay steady as I unlocked it. But as I stepped outside, I felt something that nearly made me collapse. Elias had followed me after all. He was standing in the bedroom doorway, watching me leave with an expression I couldn't interpret. Angry? Hurt? Blank? I didn't know. I didn't wait to find out. The second the door shut behind me, I ran to my car. I wasn't subtle about it. I didn't care anymore. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine so fast my hands slipped on the steering wheel. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A message from Elias. "You shouldn't have left." Another one followed 10 seconds later. "You said you trusted me." Then, I wasn't done. My whole spine went cold. I blocked him immediately, shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. But blocking him didn't stop the fear. All the way home, I kept checking my mirrors, half convinced he would show up behind me, headlights cutting through the dark. I made it home safely, locked my doors, and sat on the floor for a long time, replaying everything in my head. The altars, the jar, the doll, the way he snapped, the chanting, the shove, the lock on the door. I've dated since then, but I haven't stepped into anyone's home on a first date again. And I don't think I ever will. Because now I understand something I didn't fully grasp before. Sometimes danger doesn't come with warning signs. Sometimes it comes with a warm smile, a clean apartment, and a quiet voice. Sometimes the scariest people are the ones who seem the most ordinary, until you're already inside their room, with the door closed, and you realize you are completely alone with them and their secrets. And sometimes, the only reason you make it out is because you listen to the fear that tells you. Story 8. Making friends has never been my strong suit. I've always been the awkward kid, the one who floated around the edges of every social group without ever really belonging to one. I spent lunch breaks in the library pretending to study, weekends at home scrolling online because I didn't have anyone to hang out with. When I was 16, I lived in Longmont, a town north of Denver that somehow manages to be both big enough to have drama and small enough that everyone knows exactly who the drama is about. It sits right where the flat plains crash into the foothills, a weird mix of old-school ranch families and tech people who escaped Boulder's prices. The high school I went to was your typical hierarchy-driven teenage ecosystem. If popularity was a pyramid, I was somewhere in the basement under the foundation. So when a new kid transferred in during the middle of sophomore year, everyone noticed, myself included. His name was Dylan, and he wasn't like the other guys at school. He wore all black, sported band tees from groups I'd never heard of but pretended I had, and had this quiet, artsy vibe that made him seem way more interesting than the loud jocks and overachievers who ran the social scene. His features were sharp, his dark eyes constantly scanning the room like he was studying people instead of trying to talk to them. Within a week, half the girls in our grade were practically throwing themselves at him, but he didn't seem to care. He ate alone, walked with headphones on, and never tried to blend in. I don't know why, but I wanted to be friends with him right away. Not because I had a crush, I didn't, but because I saw something in him that felt familiar. He was an outsider. He liked art. He didn't seem bothered by being alone. I thought, finally, someone who gets it. So one day in the library, I walked up to him and commented on the book he was reading. Some edgy fantasy novel with skulls and ravens on the cover. He looked up, surprised anyone had approached him, but he wasn't rude. We started talking. Then we kept talking. At school first, then texting after school, then eventually hanging out on weekends. Within a few months, Dylan was my closest friend. Honestly, he was probably my only real friend at the time. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I glossed over. At the time, though, I was so grateful to have someone who didn't make me feel like an outsider that I ignored every warning sign flashing in neon lights. For starters, Dylan had an obsession with death. And not in the standard teenage, I listen to sad music and write angsty poetry way. He collected taxidermy pieces, Stuff he said he bought from antique stores and estate sales, and he displayed them in his room like trophies. Every time I went to his place, a house sitting on the edge of Longmont, surrounded by empty fields, I'd see more of them. Birds, foxes, raccoons, glass eyes staring at us while we talked. His journals were even worse. He let me look through one once, and it was filled with drawings of dead animals, violent scenarios, and these long, messy paragraphs about pain and decay. He always said it was art, that real art was supposed to push boundaries and make people uncomfortable. I believed him because I didn't know any better, and because I wanted him to think I understood him. He also had a talent for pushing my boundaries without me noticing. He was the one who talked me into urban exploring abandoned buildings around Boulder County. Old mining shacks, collapsed barns, dusty warehouses with boarded doors. He made it sound rebellious and meaningful. We'd squeeze through broken windows, crunch across floors that felt like they could cave in any second, and wander through rooms filled with rust, shadows, and mold. Dylan always brought a camera and looked genuinely alive in those places, like being surrounded by destruction soothed him. Eventually, he pulled me into shoplifting too. It started as grabbing candy bars or cheap makeup from drugstores. Just small things he framed as sticking it to corporations. He made it sound deep and philosophical, like we were freeing ourselves from capitalism or something. I was too naive and too eager for approval to see it for what it was: stealing. And because we didn't get caught, he kept pushing the limit, and I never pushed back. But the biggest red flag, the one I should have run from, was Dylan's mental state. He was open about the fact that he struggled with depression, and I respected him for being honest. Mental health wasn't exactly a conversation people at school were having yet. He told me he'd been in therapy for years, that his family had moved to Longmont partly to give him a fresh start, and that medication helped some days. I didn't realize how heavy all of this really was until months into our friendship. Dylan would talk for hours about death, not in the poetic way anymore, but in scarily specific ways. He told me he thought about ending his life almost every day, that he had researched different methods and weighed pros and cons like he was choosing college classes. He said he didn't see the point of living, that everything felt empty except when he was interacting with death, drawing it, reading about it, exploring abandoned places, studying rot and decay. I tried to get him to talk to his therapist or his parents, but he always shut me down. He said I was the only person who didn't judge him, the only one who truly understood the void. That line should have terrified me. Instead, it made me feel responsible for him. The friendship became draining. Everything in my life revolved around Dylan, his moods, his dark thoughts, his obsessions. My grades slipped. I stopped hanging out with the few acquaintances I had. My world shrank down to him. My parents noticed something was wrong, but I brushed them off. Then I started dating someone, a guy from my English class. And that's when things spiraled. Dylan hated him. He didn't hide it. He became clingy, jealous, passive-aggressive. He'd text non-stop, ask where I was every hour, show up places uninvited. He'd make comments like, "Guess I'm not good enough for you anymore." I kept trying to defend him, to smooth things over, but the tension was constant and exhausting. Everything finally boiled over when my boyfriend and I decided to visit Dylan together, hoping they could get along if they actually hung out. What we found at Dylan's house that day changed everything. And it was the moment I realized I had never truly understood my friend at all. After that night, a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. But the memories stayed with me, heavy and unshakable. I thought about all the time I had spent wrapped up in Logan's darkness, how I had let him dominate my life, my thoughts, even my emotions. The relief I felt wasn't guilt-free. It was tangled with grief, confusion, and a lingering fear that maybe I had failed him somehow. But deep down, I knew I had done the right thing. Friendship alone wasn't enough to pull someone out of that kind of despair. In the weeks that followed, I leaned on my boyfriend more than ever. He had been my anchor, the one who pulled me out when Logan's world became too much to bear. He reminded me that caring for someone didn't mean letting them hurt you, or themselves, without limits. Slowly, I began to re-establish parts of my life that Logan had consumed. I focused on school again, started showing up for projects and clubs, and even reconnected with a few classmates I'd drifted away from. But the experience had changed me. I was more cautious about friendships, more aware of the fine line between supporting someone and enabling them, and more conscious of my own boundaries. Sometimes I still replay that shed in my mind. The smell, the sight, the sheer wrongness of it. But over time, those images became a reminder, a marker for what to avoid in the future. I realized that some people are too far gone for friendship alone to save, and that love and compassion have limits when faced with self-destruction. I carried that lesson into every relationship afterward. I became someone who could listen and support, but also someone who could step back and insist on my own safety and sanity. I also thought a lot about Pineville and towns like it, where appearances hide the truth. People may live normal, quiet lives on the surface, but underneath, darkness can fester unnoticed. Teenagers struggling with mental health, abuse, or trauma often slip through the cracks because everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. I had almost been caught in that current myself, and I felt a responsibility, in some vague way, to be more observant, more present for others who might be struggling, without losing myself in their problems. Logan eventually left Pineville after his stay in the psychiatric facility. I heard through a few mutual contacts that he moved with his family to another state and received ongoing treatment. I never sought him out, and he never reached back. Part of me wondered what he was doing, whether he had found stability, or if he had sunk even deeper into the darkness I'd glimpsed. I wanted to hope for the best. I clung to the idea that he might have found some peace, though I knew that hope had to be separate from guilt. The biggest realization I carried forward was about my own vulnerability. I had been lonely, desperate for connection, and that made me blind to red flags that should have been glaring. I had wanted friendship so badly that I ignored boundaries, excused harmful behavior, and allowed myself to be manipulated. Recognizing that made me more vigilant in future relationships. I learned to appreciate solitude, yes, but also to value friends who respected limits, who uplifted rather than dragged me into chaos. Looking back, I can even see the subtle ways Logan had influenced me positively. He introduced me to art in ways I hadn't experienced before, pushed me to think critically about mortality, and helped me understand empathy in extreme situations. But those lessons came at a cost. They came wrapped in fear, guilt, and confusion. They were hard-won, and they left a scar I carry to this day. The key was learning to separate the meaningful insight from the destructive behaviors that accompanied it. I think about the other kids Logan might have befriended if I hadn't been there. Kids who might not have noticed the danger signs, who might have been manipulated or hurt. That thought terrifies me. It reminds me that being a friend sometimes requires courage, discernment, and even action that isn't easy. Speaking up, setting limits, calling out harmful behavior. These are not betrayals. They are necessary boundaries that can prevent harm and save lives. The experience also made me rethink what it means to be close with someone. I had always equated intimacy with total availability and emotional sacrifice, believing that giving all of yourself was the ultimate proof of loyalty. But after Logan, I understood that true closeness doesn't come at the cost of your well-being. Friendship is a balance. It's about support, yes, but also about mutual respect and safety. You can care deeply without letting someone's chaos consume you entirely. In the years since, I've approached friendships with a mix of openness and caution. I've become someone who listens, who empathizes, and who invests time and energy in people I care about. But I also know my limits. I know when to step back, when to demand boundaries, and when to prioritize my own mental health. That knowledge has shaped not just friendships, but romantic relationships, family dynamics, and even professional interactions. It's a lesson that Logan, in his tragic and troubling way, taught me. Sometimes I think about Logan late at night, when memories surface unbidden. I wonder if he's okay, if he's still grappling with his demons, if he's found something worth holding on to. I hope so. But I also know that my life is no longer defined by him, by his darkness, or by my need to save anyone. I have my own path, my own stability, and my own friends who bring light rather than fear. The story of those years in Pineville has stayed with me. A mix of gratitude, sorrow, and hard-won wisdom. It reminds me that even when we want to help someone, we must recognize the limits of what we can do. Not everyone can be saved by friendship, and sometimes the bravest act is stepping away. I carry that lesson into every new connection, every bond I form, and every choice I make about who I let into my life. Now, I am more grounded. I know the signs of unhealthy attachment, the difference between support and enabling, and the responsibility we have to both ourselves and those around us. I know that compassion does not mean self-destruction, and that sometimes letting go is the most loving thing you can do. And while the memories of Logan's darkness linger, they no longer hold me hostage. They are a reminder, a warning, and, paradoxically, a source of strength. Story 9. My best friend Jordan disappeared back in February of 2019, during what was supposed to be a low-key ski getaway to Aspen Creek. We had been planning the trip for months, both of us hyped to escape the chaos of Denver and spend a long weekend in the mountains. That winter had been rough for Jordan, dealing with a messy breakup and work stress, and she had been the one to suggest Aspen Creek in particular. She said she read about it online and thought it was perfect